Okay, what could be more exciting than a video on boredom? Hold on to your thinking caps, y'all. If you ever feel like your creativity is being dulled by the constant distractions of our modern world, this episode is for you. We can't sit still, even when we're sitting still. As soon as we sit down, we have a knee-jerk reaction to reach for our phones. The idea of having nothing to do is panic-inducing for some of us. But this is not a recent phenomenon, and I'm by no means breaking news here. This has been well documented and much talked about. In fact, I just saw recently the US Surgeon General recommending warning labels for social media platforms. So obviously it's an issue. As a creative person, a creative professional, wow, I suddenly feel more important. As a person who deals in creativity, my focus is the most valuable thing that I have. And it's also the most fragile. I'm neurodivergent, and although I haven't been diagnosed with ADHD, I'm pretty sure I have some form of it. As a kid growing up in the 70s and 80s, being bored was just a fact of life. Boredom was a condition I didn't even know how to name because it just took up most of my waking hours. Of course, we had TV, and actually cable TV, pretty early on. My grandfather and my father were both fascinated with technology and had to be the first to get everything. But with the exception of primetime television sitcoms, most of the stuff that was on was boring. Well, at least to me at the time. So I would ride my bike or skateboard and explore my world. I would devise elaborate scenes with my Star Wars action figures with all sorts of dramatic twists. My imagination would have to fill the time between when I got home and dinner. And that's exactly what boredom is good for, putting our imagination to work. There was a study published in 2019 that showed that participants who engaged in boring tasks such as sorting beans were more productive and more creative afterwards. So today I want to get into the gift of boredom, why we hate it, why we need it, and how can we put it to use. Let's get started. It makes me sad to think that my children's generation has been robbed of their boredom. But honestly, it wasn't until recently that boredom was even on my radar as something to value. Boredom always seemed like something to avoid or something to overcome. Well, now that we've overcome boredom with the help of technology, am I just romanticizing my childhood? Were things actually better when people waited in line at the grocery store with no way to scroll Instagram? Granted, there was no Instagram to scroll, but my question is, were things better when we had nothing to do? But before we really get going here, if you're enjoying the video, do me a favor and give it a thumbs up and subscribe while you're at it. If you're new here, welcome to Keep the Flow. I'm Scott McLemore, a drummer and composer living way up north in Iceland. I make these episodes every week to look under the hood of the creative process and to keep our creative engines humming. But I think one of the most important benefits of boredom is that we're conserving dopamine. We tend to think of dopamine as something that we just have a limitless supply of. And our brain is constantly manufacturing it. So in a way that's true, but there are limitations to that. Dopamine production is dependent on an amino acid called tyrosine, which is found in certain foods like eggs and nuts. But there are also enzymes involved, so a healthy, balanced diet is important, whatever that means. But I think an even more important limitation is our own response to dopamine. The more we experience it, the less sensitive we are to it. So even if we technically have an endless supply, if our tolerance is gradually increasing, then it doesn't really matter how much we have. The psychologist Cameron Sepa came up with the idea of going on a dopamine fast, which is really just another way of saying give yourself a break or don't forget to schedule downtime. We technically can't actually take a break from dopamine. That factory is constantly up and running. But even though our brain produces it, we don't always use it. The neurons will only release it when we do something worthy of a hit. Okay, so I'm not a scientist or a doctor, and before I get too far into Andrew Huberman's territory, I'll just say that I'm fascinated by this stuff, but I'm by no means an expert. As far as I can figure out though, being bored is actually the feeling of not getting dopamine. I don't want to get too technical, even though it seems like I probably already have. But being bored feels that way because the neurons don't release the dopamine. So the neuron receptors in our brain don't get their fix, that sweet dopamine hit. So it's unpleasant to feel bored. But that's the thing that jumpstarts our imagination, our curiosity, and allows us to hone our problem-solving skills. As soon as we feel bored, we ask ourselves, what should I do? How can I get out of this? When I was a kid, the solution was either to hop on my skateboard or the drums or the piano or an Apple 2GS computer that I had for writing music. I also had a 4-track recorder that I would use to make up songs. There was always something to do, but I had to pick one of those things. I could have probably also done my homework, but I'm kind of glad I didn't. These days, the easiest thing to do if you're a kid is look at your phone. And they do. But so do we. Why wouldn't we? It's right there in the palm of our hands. We have an entertainment center, a communication device. It's really an anti-boredom device. And I don't want it to sound like that I'm against technology. I'm not. I use it all the time. In fact, I'm filming this right now on my phone. These can be incredible devices for creativity. But as amazing as they are, having easy access to boredom relief in our pockets means less time for imagination, curiosity, creativity, and less opportunity to hone our problem-solving skills. And in the process, that steady drip of dopamine we get from scrolling on social media increases our tolerance so that when we do get a normally dopamine-rich experience, the feeling is dulled. As creative people, we should be alarmed at this. Feeling inspired has a lot to do with dopamine. So if our dopamine receptors are numbed out, when we are inspired, it'll feel less, inspiring. When we come back, we'll get into how to ease up on the dopamine, learn to love boredom, like boredom, maybe. It's me again. If you've made it this far, I'm guessing me talking about boredom isn't so boring. Or maybe you've already fallen asleep and you're just not listening anymore. But hey, on the off chance that you're still conscious, please hit that thumbs up and subscribe. And I might as well tell you about my Patreon. I'm sure everyone already knows what Patreon is, but in my case, I'm doing multiple things there, so allow me to explain. First, regarding the show, Keep the Flow, I release podcast episodes there first, so you get early access. I also post bonus content, including my series Hiking with Pity, and I post extended interviews there when I have guests on the show. But I'm also a musician, so I'm posting videos there of me composing, trying to give a behind-the-scenes view of my process. And when I'm on the road, I post little videos of my adventures. Here's a recent one from the Glacial Lagoon in Iceland. But beyond that, Patreon is really where I'm trying to build a community of creative people. As it grows, I'm planning on doing group discussions, show and tell, so that we can show what we've been working on recently and get support and feedback from like-minded people. So go check it out at patreon.com/ScottMcLemore. You can follow me there for free, or for as little as $1 a month. You can get the perks that come with being part of the community. And now, back to Keep the Flow. Okay, I said we would learn to love boredom. I might have been lying. I don't know if we really can learn to love it, but here are 3 ways we can learn to tolerate it, to value it, and to put it to use. But before we get to all that, I should address the obvious contradiction before us. Mindfulness is something that I've recommended here quite regularly, and I stand by that 100%, except when I don't. You see, there's this thing called daydreaming that's actually quite beneficial to creativity. Boredom is also not only when we think we have nothing to do, it's when we're doing things that are uninteresting to us. And let's be honest, as creative people, there are a ton of things that we do that are uninteresting to us. Paying bills, doing dishes, laundry. I could go on. Not that only creative people find these things tedious, but I think it goes against our natural instinct to be involved in a creative activity. Now, one approach to this would be to say, hey, just be in the present. Wash those dishes, be one with the dish. Which, yes, okay, that's great. That's mindfulness. But sometimes we can engage in these tasks and basically go on autopilot. And instead of really being one with the dish, we're daydreaming about something completely different. I need water. My voice is just not holding up to that. And maybe that takes us longer to do the task, and maybe we don't do as good a job, but sometimes that's okay. So number one is reframing tedious tasks as opportunities for daydreaming. If we think of those activities as potential daydreaming events, they become useful moments where we can let loose with our imagination and curiosity. When my wife and I first started living together, actually this is kind of embarrassing, but when we first started living together, I asked her earnestly if I could do most of the cooking and she would do the dishes, because I hated doing the dishes. Luckily, she didn't leave me, but she pointed out how ridiculous that was. However, I was being honest when I said I hated it. I hated doing the dishes, but I think what I really hated was the feeling of boredom. Cooking is a creative activity, and I certainly got a hit of dopamine if the food turned out tasty. But doing dishes is a repetitive task that requires very little brain power. Yet now I actually kind of like it. Once we surrender to the task, instead of thinking about how horribly boring it is, we can accept it as an opportunity for daydreaming. I was listening to an interview recently with Dr. K. Alok Kanoja, who is the founder of Healthy Gamer. And he was talking about shower thoughts, meaning ideas we get in the shower. He asked what makes the shower so special that we get all these thoughts there. And the answer is kind of obvious. We don't take our phones in the shower. Of course, the one place we don't take our phones is where we're getting all these ideas. This brings us to number 2, unplugging. And yes, we've heard it a million times. Unplug. Take a digital fast. Go off the grid. But I don't think we need to be nearly as extreme as locking ourselves in a cabin somewhere until we start talking to a volleyball named Wilson. Knowing the fact that because we don't take our phone in the shower allows us to come up with all these ideas means that we can replicate that in different situations where we find ourselves habitually reaching for our phones, waiting at the pharmacy for a prescription, in line at the grocery store, at the DMV, in the waiting room at the dentist. Wherever we're waiting, like I said, I'm not anti-technology. It can be an amazing tool for creativity, but it can also be an addictive time suck, which lulls us into a dopamine-induced coma. If we fight the temptation to look at our phones every time we're waiting somewhere to kill time, even if it feels like we're being productive, that can turn into a cathartic experience. Let your imagination take over. Look around you. Take in all the details. What's nice about it? What's lame about it? How could it be better? Or just let your mind wander. I think a tendency we have these days is the feeling that we always need to be productive. If we're not using our time to learn or improve or quote unquote move the needle, then we're wasting time. This couldn't be further from the truth. We're not wasting time when we're daydreaming or when we're practicing mindfulness or gratitude. And we're certainly not wasting time when we carve out downtime for ourselves. Which brings me to number 3, embracing downtime. When we're working, when we're trying to get things done, we set boundaries for ourselves. At least we try to. We say no to social media, no to YouTube, no to Netflix. But when we have downtime, it's easier to give in to all of those things. And we should, in moderation. However, we should also set aside time to be without it. We need to set boundaries for our downtime a little bit in the same way we do for our work. And rest is really important. Saundra Dalton-Smith, MD, known for her book Sacred Rest, says that, I gotta read this. Rest is the most underused, chemical-free, safe and effective alternative therapy available to us. She came up with a theory that there are 7 types of rest that humans need: physical rest, mental rest, sensory rest, emotional rest, social rest, creative rest, and what was the last one? Spiritual rest. I'll go deeper into each of these in a future episode, but for now, just know that rest is really important no matter what line of work you're in. But as creative people, it's a crucial ingredient for our work. However, we should be careful not to conflate relaxation with boredom. Listening to a podcast or music while we're doing a repetitive task is fine, but we're also circumventing the boredom when we do that. Being bored is not relaxing. It's actually more of an agitated state. When we're out of balance and constantly giving ourselves some dopamine reward, rest can actually lead to boredom. We don't know what to do with ourselves. Our brain is asking for more dopamine, and when it doesn't come, the unpleasant sensation of boredom sets in. But like anything, the more we do it, the easier it gets, the less unpleasant it becomes, and the closer we get to stillness. And stillness is wonderful, but it's not boredom. Going back to my childhood for a moment, I felt incredibly bored a lot of the time. School was unbearably boring for me, not because I was smart, but because I wasn't interested in it. These days, feeling bored takes effort. I like my job. Most of what I do is interesting to me. And it seems like there's always new music or new things to watch coming out. YouTube is always a click away, and I follow a ton of interesting channels there. So there's always new videos on a variety of subjects. I'm spoiled. Not that my life is perfect, but it's never been easier for us to fill our downtime with things that are interesting to us. It actually takes a lot of effort to not do that. So when I say embrace downtime, I mean, yes, rest, relax, enjoy our modern distractions, but also try to forego them sometimes, not just in the shower. Having moments of boredom allows our natural need to create to reveal itself in the most pure sense. Just the other day, I was at the pharmacy getting a prescription filled, and I went to sit down in the little waiting area they have, and I realized that my phone was in my hand before my butt actually hit the chair, but I didn't know why I was looking at it. It's become a habit, a really bad habit, that we reach for the boredom escape hatch whenever we have a moment to think, almost as if we're scared of thinking. And I'm incredibly sympathetic to that. I mean, there are plenty of things that I would rather not think about. And sometimes we need an escape, but not all the time. We should never make escaping our thoughts a habit. So to sum this whole thing up, boredom sucks, but boredom is also awesome. Class dismissed. Okay, that wasn't a great summary. Let me try that again. Boredom is basically like the equivalent of kale to creatives. We hate it, but we need it. We can put dressing on it or add different ingredients to it, but to get the full benefits, we have to eat it raw. Or you could just take more showers. However, as boring as it is to be bored, the creativity waiting on the other side of it is well worth the discomfort. That's all I've got for today. Thanks so much for hanging out. Please take a moment to hit that thumbs up and subscribe. I'll try not to be boring. And stop by my Patreon page to get early access to podcast episodes, bonus material, and catch up on my series Hiking with Penny. I'll catch you in the next episode. Until then, keep the flow. He asked, what makes the shower so special? Special. What makes it so special? Somebody's upstairs doing something. But like anything, the more we do it, the easier it gets. We're rolling. This is so exciting. Okay. Let me see. Make sure the hat's on straight. Everything's good. All right. It's me again.